This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Home Abstract and Title Company was founded in 1867 and is the oldest company still operating in McLennan County. Home Abstract is comprised of a team of honest, friendly, hardworking professionals dedicated to providing both commercial and residential real estate clients with the highest level of communication and service. Their team is committed to working hard and building and maintaining strong relationships because transactions are so much more than just deals. They are clients, deserving of the courtesy, care, and respect that Home Abstract and Title Company is known for. Visit Home Abstract and Title Company at homeabstract.com.
Cross the Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos and Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
Welcome back to the Waco History Podcast. The Crossroads series has been really a turning point in my life and in Rick's life. Everything else was prelude, pre-Crossroads, and everything.
How long have we been at this?
Well, we recorded our first Waco as Crossroads episode on September the 6th. Not this year, last year. So we've been at it just over a year.
Wow.
15. This is the 15th episode in the Crossroads series, and we've had some incredible guests as we've gone along the way. And I do want to thank our guests again. So Claire Colgin McDonald, John Morris joined us, Mayor Dylan Meek, Dr. Mike Parrish. Who else joined us?
Brady
Rick?
Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had Ashley Cruz Turner and Marlene McMichael, Chris Collins from the Chamber of Commerce, Fiona Bond, Jim Holmes, Waco City Councilman.
That's right. And, of course, Sheriff Parnell McNamara joined us for this last one. But before that, we had Chris Hansen and Carl Hoover on our Entertainment 3 episode. And so it's been quite a journey, and we covered a lot of ground. I think this was your idea. I want to credit you. I think this was your idea originally. Obviously,
I was just trying to find a way to spend more time with you.
Well, that's understandable. I'd like to get away from myself, but there's no way that can possibly happen. But this is Crossroads 15, and Rick and I thought it'd be a great idea to do an episode just where we reflect back a little bit. So episode 1 in this series was Waco as Crossroads, and so we're going to take some time today to kind of reflect back and revisit the Crossroads.
Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting. I mean, it seems like after you do something like a podcast or even day to day, you tell a story and you go, man, I wish I left out a detail I wish I'd said, or you come across a new piece of information that would have been, really good to have in that original discussion. Or oftentimes in this case, you listen to the episode you just did and you go, oh, I need to do a correction on that.
Yeah, or a postmortem or an autopsy. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to think. There's metaphors to use to think about what we're about to do.
Yes. So anyway, there's stuff to talk about. So in episode 1, where we it was the setup episode describing the metaphor, which or the reason for the metaphor. I mean, the literal, the Crossroads of Waco, and we had Claire Colgin on, and she had some great family history. Of the Colgin family history, where very, very involved in the building of roads and really the introduction of automobiles and the road system, the highway system, things that we take for granted now that didn't even exist, and how that was built out. So that was fun. So in further research, I came across an interesting excerpt from 1909 that I think punctuates this early automobile history in the Crossroads. So apparently there was a Dr. W.O. Wilkes who had purchased the 16th car in Waco. So I guess, I don't know when you quit counting. Right? I've got the 37th car ever in Waco. But anyway, he had the 16th one, and he went on a road trip with his family to Temple, big long road trip to Temple, and kept a log. Right? Like Star Trek here. So it starts off, I'm sure this means in the morning, 9:35, left Waco. 9:55, stopped to see why car is boiling water. And then next entries are talking about ended up changing 3 flats and refilling the radiator 8 times just to get to Temple.
Gosh.
And then on the return trip, had 3 more flats. So those roads must have been really good. And then I love this entry at the end of it. Running over a girl cost us $600, not to mention flowers, candy, etc.
Oh man, you know those early days of car travel. You know, in the most recent episode, we talked about the relationship with your horse. You kind of had to have that sort of relationship with your automobile early on. You had to know it that intimately because you were its mechanic.
You had to know
if anything went wrong with it,
yeah. You know, it's funny in the when you see early car racing. In fact, we had a race car track at the Cotton Palace. That was one of the features they added after a while. But you see those long races, you had the race car driver, and then sitting next to him was the mechanic.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, which is probably more important than the driver.
Yeah.
I was struck as we think about it now. You know, that first episode we talked about the concept of Waco's Crossroads. And as we've gone through, you know, these 14 episodes, we've really discovered that reaffirmed a lot of ways that we didn't even think about at first.
Yeah. It wasn't just product placement using the name, but it really is apt to who we are, and you see it historically talked about. I mean, we're not the first ones to discover this connection, and even George Erath in his early writings talking about, hey, this town that I'm laying out for the first time could be a prominent town.
Anyway.
In things we don't, just as we're talking about the Wilkes family driving down to Temple, we've lost the perspective of travel before roads. Somebody's already gone ahead of us and bulldozed these roads and made them flat and put bridges in and do all that. I mean, if you think back into the 1840s, 1850s and beyond, I mean, you're really trying to pick the path of least resistance. And that path of least resistance comes right up the Balcones Escarpment on the east side of the Balcones Escarpment, all the way from South Texas up to Dallas. And we're right on it.
Whether you're moving, whether it's wildlife moving that direction, steers moving that direction, people moving that direction,
indigenous Americans, I mean, it was their
goods moving that direction, whatever it might be.
Another part about Waco, speaking of travel, and this is kind of more in the city that we touched on lightly, but probably deserves a lot more in-depth discussion. The trolleys. I love the old pictures of the trolleys in Waco, and it's hard to imagine that now, right? You think of trolleys are so romanticized by places like San Francisco or other places like that, and you're like, well, Waco was an early adopter of that. So looked up a couple things on it. So it was in 1891. We already had horse-drawn trolleys. That's when they converted to electric. So 1891. That seems pretty early.
Yeah.
And then in the interurban shows up in 1913. They put that in, and it's actually it connects a lot of the cities in Texas. And so at that point, someone from Waco could jump on the interurban and be in Dallas in about 2 hours.
Yeah, and it's the ridership, hundreds of thousands of people are riding the interurban even through the 1940s. In many of the oral histories, they have reminiscences of riding the interurban. Something that happened since we recorded that episode is the redoing of Elm Avenue
That's right.
Pulling up the interurban tracks they're finally pulling those up in this redo of Elm Avenue. It was just really interesting to see. And it made me kind of long for something like the interurban, what a benefit that would be if we still had something like that you could hop on that and ride to DFW or something like that.
Yeah, that makes me think about the layers of archaeology. You know, you think about people excavating cities in Mesopotamia. Well, someday they're going to be excavating Waco, and they're going to get down to the inner urban layer.
Yeah.
And they're going to find these railroad tracks under the asphalt.
Yeah.
And try to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So our second episode was it was kind of the prequel to the first episode.
Yeah, this was just us kind of talking about some of the elements of early Waco history.
Yeah.
And pre-Waco history.
Yeah, so you're going, I think pulled a lot of what George Erath had written about laying out the town, and he was also involved with Fort Fisher when it was established as a ranger camp. It was never really officially a fort, but since then, I came across a great book called Romer's Texas. Is written by a German named Dr. Ferdinand Romer in 1845.
Roemer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he came over here. So there was a huge waves of German immigration to Texas. And in fact, the things I learned in his book was it was more formalized. I mean, there was actually an association over there sending Germans over, recruiting them and sending them and supplying them to come to Texas. And so he came over not to immigrate, but really to write a guidebook for others who were coming. So he came over here for 2 years, traveled around Texas, was there when New Braunfels was established, and then they went into the hill country and established Fredericksburg. And anyway, some great initial stuff. But one of the things he did is he visited Torrey's Trading Company, which was the trading company probably 5 or 6 miles downriver from downtown Waco on Tawankana Creek.
Yeah, if you know where Trading House Lake is, that's kind of the area where the trading post was.
Yeah. So he's a scientific mind, so he gives a great description of pre-Waco history out there. And he actually was traveling with one of the Torrey brothers himself. But here's a quick excerpt as he's describing what's going on at the trading post. He says, already on the second day of our arrival, a small Indian band chanced to arrive in order to trade. To see the long train resembling a caravan appear on the hill on which the trading post stood presented a picturesque and fascinating sight for a European. According to Indian custom, they rode single file, the men in advance, dressed in their best, looking about, dignified and grave. The lively squaws following, sitting astride like the men, each usually carrying a black-eyed little papoose on her back and another one on the front saddle. At the same time, they kept a watchful eye on the pack horses, which carried the skins and various household goods. A halt was made near the houses. There were like 5 or 6 houses that made up the post. And immediately, the squaws were busy chopping down branches needed for constructing their tents. Later, the skins to be traded were brought to the warehouse, weighed, and the value determined. The Indians then selected goods equivalent to the price agreed upon. Usually, such a visit lasted several days and had the same happy significance for the Indians as a country fair has for our German people.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Just a little glimpse of what life was like in Central Texas in 1845.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, our third episode, we had John Morrison. We fast forwarded. We didn't necessarily stick chronologically. We went thematically.
You gotta go. You gotta go with how it flows.
When you get John Morris, you get him.
Yeah.
And so we got him to talk about goal line crossings, sports in Waco. One thing I've thought about since then, of course, we had not started fully had momentum on the Foster Pavilion, the new basketball arena. And it's interesting how Baylor's kind of re-embraced I-35 now with the Welcome Center and the stadium and then the new Foster Pavilion. Recognizing the exposure for the university is that corridor, and particularly like McLean Stadium is the best billboard anyone could ever build for Baylor University.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for years when you drove through Waco, You saw the spires in the distance, and then there's some buildings over there.
Yeah.
And you're looking at the backside of some dorms, and that was okay. Well, there's Baylor if you go off there, but now it's the front door, right?
If you're heading south, the interstate bends in such a way that you hit a rise. So at night when McLean Stadium is lit up, you hit a rise and it looks like the interstate goes through. I mean, it is centered in the highway, and so it's an incredible kind of vision of Baylor that's available to all these folks coming down the interstate.
And the addition of when they redid the bridges over the interstate and added the lighting and the architectural, tip of the hat to the suspension bridge, the way that's laid out. It's really nice. And now you're gonna have a new pavilion there.
Yeah.
And the Herd Center. So we've stepped up our game a little bit.
We have. Now, I know you did some extra research and you reached out to John to see if he had any addendums for.
Well, one thing that also has changed largely, and this goes beyond history, maybe talking a little bit about the future, but the Big 12, the makeup of the Big 12 has totally changed since we did that episode.
Yeah.
And
we're increasingly bad at math.
It does not speak well to the academic structures. But so think about that as a Crossroads now. I mean, we've got more teams from further away showing up in Little Waco, Texas.
We're almost coast to coast now with the Big 12. So
that's and there's both sides of that story. I mean, it was great when we had everything was almost in state, but that's not the world we live in anymore.
Yeah.
Something else that when I was thinking really more along the lines of leisure. I mean, this isn't necessarily I guess it's sports now, but something that has never come up really in any of our discussions was golf.
Yeah. Yeah. So what should we include with that?
Well, what I do know, and there's probably a golf historian that knows more than I do. I mean, they barely even let me show up at Topgolf because that's how bad I am. But
that's why I think you're the reason why they put the big fence up.
They never put anybody on either side of me. Whatever, but who knows? So golf came to Waco in 1912. So Waco's kind of first country club, the Waco Club.
Waco Club.
Yeah. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Waco Club. It was built at 19th and Sanger, that area. So I know that area because that's where Antioch Community Church is, kind of in that, just right off of Waco Drive. So it was a 19-hole course.
9-hole.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
9-hole course.
Yeah.
And had a beautiful clubhouse designed by Roy E. Lane.
Yeah, it's on the app if you want to see pictures of the clubhouse. Unfortunately, it has a tragic end. I'll let Rick tell you about the end. But the links of that court, the timing of everything, when the club goes away, they abandon the golf course and go out to Lacey Lakeview to build the first 18-hole golf course in town. But it is those open links that kind of become the Castle Heights neighborhood because there's descriptions of the links kind of coming up to the unfinished walls of what later becomes known as the Cottonland Castle or the Waco Castle there on Austin.
Oh, I can see that. What's that? The creek running through there. Has a nice fall.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Yeah. I bet it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So what happens to the Waco Club?
Well, what often happened to the fate of wood buildings in that time period, it burned down in 1917.
Yeah. So tragic.
Yeah. So episode 4, we got into the political side of the Crossroads of Waco.
Mayor Meek, our lame duck,
yes,
mayor.
Yes, yeah, he's got till the spring.
Yeah, till spring. He's in place, but he came in to kind of help us talk about not only city, but we talked about state politics. We talked about national politics and the way Waco's kind of had a place in those.
Yeah, and a lot of characters, a lot of people through the years. And one of the things you notice when you're looking at that timeline, you see a lot more on the front end,
Mm-hmm.
right? The
Yeah.
late 1800s, early 1900s. That's where we had most of our governors, had most of the influence in the state. And I found a great quote from the Dallas Morning News, February 24th, 1892. So a contemporary quote here, and the Morning News states, Waco is a political center. There is no doubt about it, just as much as Tyler, and she makes governorships and senatorships as her political diet. Nothing short of these.
Just as much as Tyler.
So she can tell things have changed since 1892.
Uh-huh.
But you can understand why. If you look at the 1900 census, Waco was the 7th largest city in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
McLennan County was the 5th largest county. So we not only had a vibrant city, we also had vibrant agriculture going on, right? The life going on outside the city. Being in the middle of the state and transportation networks not being as robust as they are, you're not taking a flight from Dallas to Austin or whatever. It just, for a lot of those reasons, Waco made a great meeting place. A lot of political conventions were hosted here as a middle ground to meet.
Mm-hmm.
And
had the railroad connection. There's still hope at that time for a waterway. Navigable Brazos is the hope of that is still in place. And so, in many ways, it's very central.
Yeah.
Economically and politically.
Yeah. One thing, and this, I would say this is probably on the, when you look at maybe the demise of Waco or how Waco waned in its influence over the years. And I picked this up when we were talking, did our episode with Parnell, and just looking at the activity of the Klan in Texas, and especially in Central Texas. That was part of the story with Sheriff Bobby Cannon and him confronting them in Lorena. But if you read more into that or look more into that, there was a big political component that came out of the Klan, right? They were wanting to get control of political positions, including the governorship and senator. And a couple of the key characters to run for those offices were in Waco, people from Waco. And that's actually what ended up fracturing the Klan, because the power bosses wanted to pick who it was going to be, but you had different people running from different sides of the state. They were all in the Klan, but nobody wanted to concede to one another. It created fractures in the leadership. And so really, as quickly as the Klan had reformed, by the late 1920s, it was no longer a viable entity anymore.
Yeah.
And a lot of that collapse happened because of what was happening in Waco.
And that collapse comes on the heels of that is the Great Depression. Yeah. And so, you're talking about a 20-year period that is pretty pivotal for Waco's kind of place in the state, where, of course, cotton crashing.
Cotton crashes. You see oil starting to be discovered in communities that had previously been just impoverished backwaters start booming.
Yeah.
So there's a huge shift, when you look at Waco's shift away from, if you want to call it, prominence, you can really see it happening in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I think the 30s was the only time Waco was flat or decreased in population.
Yeah. And we do want to say, hey, we're back, baby. We're talking historically. But,
yes.
And just to keep that in mind.
But it's interesting to connect those dots.
We then had it was around December, I think we had Mike Parrish in to talk about kind of the military history of Waco, which again is somewhat front loaded, but very, very interesting.
Yeah, and very much strategic.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was those were economic development opportunities that the leadership of Waco ran hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the different bases, whether it was MacArthur, Richfield, the Bluebonnet plant. Almost all those, it was the local governments going out and buying that property, and then getting the federal government to send, the base, the military bases over here.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't just happenstance. Somebody didn't just pick us out on a map. It was some proactivity to make that happen.
Definitely.
Now, this is a little tangential, but I think incredibly interesting. So
listen, you don't do a 15-episode series without getting a little tangential. So this carries on a tradition we've established as well. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's our way. So we talked about before when World War I came, and Texas had a huge German population. We just talked about Romer and these waves of Germans that came over. Well, one of the negative effects of going to war with Germany was now everybody kind of there was the German scare. People weren't sure of the loyalties of some of these immigrants, and some of them were actively against going to war with Germany. Some spoke out, some didn't. Some were hugely patriotic to the U.S. So it was a mixed bag.
And I will tease while we're tangential. I will tease our episode on World War I with Stephen Seeloff, where we get into a little bit Waco High, Baylor, how it was impacted by what you're talking about. Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that most Waco citizens didn't know, but they learned as in the lead up to World War I, was that one of the Waco's largest landowners was the Chancellor of the German Empire. Right?
Yeah.
And I never. Most people don't know even remember that we think of Wilhelm II, right? The lead as the leader of Germany, but they did have a chancellor, and see if I can. You're better at saying names. You say his name.
This is Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg.
That's right, Bethmann-Hollweg. So he served under Wilhelm. His brother had been one of the immigrants to Texas in the 1880s and had acquired land in Riesel and Waco. And upon his death, he left that land to his brother. So his brother's the acting chancellor of Germany, and he owns basically a city block. The city block that is comes from Austin to Franklin, 23rd to 24th Street. So if you're going down Franklin today, and you look over and you see the crispy chicken shack, that block that's on was owned by the Chancellor of Germany.
Now I want chicken.
Well, we'll be done here.
All right, okay.
He also owned some land over by Baylor as well, and then, like I said, land in Riesel. So he fiercely was trying to sell it before the war started because he knew, and what did happen is what didn't get sold got confiscated by the government.
So that's really interesting. I mean, to bring in, because that talks about, what a lot of people miss at times is the German influence in Texas, even at that late date. So in the lead up to the American entry into the Great War, we didn't know there was going to be a sequel, so we called it the Great War.
Yeah.
There's the infamous Zimmerman telegram, where the Germans make an offer for the Mexican government to enter the war against the U.S., and they'll reclaim lands lost in the Mexican-American War and other things like that. But it's because of those German connections in Mexico and in border states, particularly Texas. There's a lot of ongoing relationship between Germany and places like Texas, even up in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, episode 6.
We timed that well. They were working on the 70th anniversary of the Waco tornado, May 11th, 1953. So when that happened this spring, we had Brady Taylor on, And the weather has been completely calm since then.
And I will say, after our episode, he had an incredible documentary that he released on the tornado that I'm sure is available online.
Monster from the Sky, yes,
Yeah.
which was really well done.
Yeah. One of the things that I remember from that episode was the difference between climate and weather.
Mm-hmm.
You know, climate is the average of the extremes of your weather.
Mm-hmm.
So this summer ended up being one of extremes.
Yeah.
So Brady sent me a list of some of those extremes that I thought I'd share with you. So this summer we had 65 days with highs 100 degrees or higher. So that's the third most on record.
Mm.
We had 28 days with highs 105 or greater. That's the second on record.
Wow.
We received officially 0.74 inches of rainfall during the summer. That's the second lowest on record. We had 29 days in a row with highs 100 plus. So it's days in a row, consecutive days. That was July 17th to August 14th. That's the fifth longest streak on record. And we had 56 days without any precipitation from July 2nd to August 26th. That is the longest streak on record. I'm happy to say that today that we are recording this, which is September 14th, we had a nice rain this morning.
Yeah, it's been very nice lately, but wow, what a dry summer. Very dry summer. So I think, Brady did a great job kind of breaking down things we should think about weather-wise and the ways in which this is a crossroads.
Yeah, and you just think about how that would affect the development of your community over time. In a wet period, especially in an agricultural-driven economy, I mean, that's mostly great. I mean, floods and stuff. I mean, there are negatives to that. But there's going to be a lot more flourishing when there's moisture, and on the years where there's droughts, it's going to be tough. And if you remember from that episode, at the time with the current technology they had with cotton cultivation at the time, this was really about the furthest west that you could cultivate cotton.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you go visit some of the towns west of here, like Hamilton and Clifton, some of those Goldthwaite, you can find they had kind of patches of cotton economy in there, probably in some bottomlands, stuff like that. But the Brazos Valley here was really the last kind of big stretch of great cottonland, and eventually, the Blacklands east of town too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We ended up doing a couple of episodes on school crossings to kind of talk about the academic history of the area, and Ashley Cruz Turner and
Marlene.
Oh yeah, Marlene McMichael came in to help us with the second in that series. What are some other things you want to make sure we include here?
It's funny. We were just talking about depression to some degree. I came across a excerpt where I guess it makes sense, right? Depression hits. Waco doesn't feel it that much right at first because not a lot of people in Waco had money in the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
But the ripple effects of the stock market start spreading around the world, and really where it hurt Waco was the European markets, because that's where most of the cotton was sold.
Mm-hmm.
So when those markets started drying up, then the business started drying up here. So eventually, a lot of people losing their jobs, farmers not able to make it, looking for everything. Well, there's a downturn in enrollment at Baylor that leads to layoffs in faculty. And, finally, a couple years into it, Baylor's struggling, and Pat Neff decides to start paying. One thing, he reduces everybody's salary by 15%. Has that happened to you yet?
It has not, luckily.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you get hit with that one. And then the second one is they start paying, I think, about 25% of their salary in Baylor script. So it was looked like a check, and it was redeemable a year forward.
Mm-hmm.
So then I guess people were taking that script and trying to use it around town to pay their bills or
to use the Baylor IOU to pay your bill. Yeah.
One of the banks in town would give the faculty 50 cents on the dollar for the script. So they could convert it to real cash.
So they were betting on Baylor surviving.
Yeah. And eventually at some point it goes to 100% script. I don't think that lasts very long. I think Neff realizes that's not a winning long-term solution, and they only do that for a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we look at some of the hard times we've gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's some of the economic times from COVID or the 07, 08, 09 downturn. I mean, what people went through in the Great Depression is unfathomable to us today, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that came out of that episode, particularly our talk with in episode number 2, is I think the era we're in now is some cross-fertilization between, those institutions are so siloed for much of their history. If we want to think about the modern educational institutions in Waco, but the cross-fertilization that's happening between those and the city, the really interesting stuff going on there. And today, as we record, there's another one, right?
Yeah, so we had a groundbreaking today for the new TSTC training facility called the Work Site, which is going to be located over in the industrial park right off of Texas Central Parkway, as opposed to the TSTC campus. So it's a facility dedicated to serving the businesses and industries here in Waco and developing workforce. So it's a big collaborative effort. Very, very thankful. I think, and also within the last week, what do they call it? The Cyber Lab was announced. That's a collaboration between Baylor and MCC.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of
the
great
brick is an unbelievable project that I enjoy every time I go over there. Just the activity that's going on at the Baylor University Research Innovative Collaborative or whatever it's called. They worked hard to make it be brick.
Yeah.
But just not only the work that's ongoing there, but the capacity for something like that. And as I drive by it, that was the old General Tire plant that closes in the early 90s, and a big economic blow, as we talked about in that episode, to Waco. And now it's kind of at the leading edge of the next generation of innovation in Waco.
Yeah. And the long-term play is there is the research that comes out of that becoming commercialized, creating new business opportunities, new economic generating opportunities for the Waco community.
Yeah.
Starting to see some of that pay off now. And speaking of the economy, episode 9, we had Chris Collins.
Yep.
From the Greater Waco Chamber, Director of Economic Development. We were able to kind of just walk through a lot of that history from being a mono economy based on cotton to one of the most diverse economies in the state of Texas today. And, you stated earlier, baby, we're back. And a lot of that is stuff that's happened in the last decade of economic development and seeing year after year of new records of companies coming to Waco, investing in our community, bringing more jobs, more diversity to the economy.
And we talked in that episode, maybe the upside. We talked earlier about the downside not being connected to oil production in Waco, but maybe seeing the upside to not being addicted to oil production as the basis for your economy.
Right. Yeah. Not if we learned that lesson during the days of cotton, you'd think Midland and Odessa would be learning that now. And actually, you see, I saw some an article this week in Odessa where they're building a amateur youth sports complex to drive more sports tourism out there, right? Trying to diversify their economy.
Rick, this is not the Odessa History Podcast.
I know.
That's another,
which is frankly something we've been doing for years through the Greater Waco Sports Commission.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, it's here.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So that's fun to see. Some again tangential, but I think it's really cool because right now, where are we sitting?
We're in the Alico building. We're on the 21st floor of the Alico building.
Yeah.
And I realized last time I was coming up here, no 13th, of course, but no second floor either. So 2 and 13 are two numbers you cannot push in the Alico building elevator.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Come visit us.
I won't do that now. Okay. So, and where does that play in tangentially? Well, the boom, the golden years of Waco, kind of early 1900s. Like I said, we were the 7th largest city. Our economy was booming on cotton. Financial center, political center of Texas. So that's when the Alico building was built in 1911, I believe.
Yeah, it takes a year.
Yeah,
it takes a year to build it.
Yeah, I mean you can't.
Yeah,
you can't build.
You can't get permitted hardly in a year.
Where's Dylan Meek? We need to talk about that. No, you can't build a 2,000 square foot house in a year hardly anymore. Yeah. So, yeah, it's amazing that they built the tallest building in west of the Mississippi in less than a year. But the original plan called for a 20-story building, but it became known that the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas was also planned to be 20 stories. So as a result, the gentleman running, the president of the insurance company at the time, Artemis Roberts, said, "Nuh-uh." Says we're going to go to 21 stories. So he upped his plans, went to 21 stories. The Adolphus countered with saying, "Well, we'll go to 21 stories as well." Roberts came back and said, "I'll take your 21 and I'll raise you to 22." So, and that's where it stood. It got built as a 22-story building, and we get to enjoy that fact right now as we sit on the 21st floor.
And I believe now the oldest historic skyscraper in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, quite a landmark.
Yeah. Man, then we got into 3 very robust episodes on entertainment.
We did. How did that be the one that became 3?
It just blew up. Well, it
3 different episodes. Yeah.
It kept going. I mean, you would uncover one area, and really, when you talk about entertainment, there are so many, roads you can travel down there. So we started with looking at places with Fiona, which is very important to her as she's leading the efforts to get a new performing arts center in Waco.
I think we went to 3 because we just wanted to talk to all these people. I mean, they're a great guest for that series.
Yeah. Well, and that worked out too.
Yeah.
So something else I've learned since we've done that episode, and since I did my episode on air conditioning, you remember that one?
Golly. I'm sorry. That's the one that's a prelude. It's my life up to that episode and then my life.
Okay.
I do remember. Yeah.
So do you know where the term blockbuster movie came from?
I saw that cryptically on this note, but I do not know what that means. Yeah. Tell us what it means.
Well, if you remember in that episode, we were talking about here in Waco, some of the early, there was the auditorium, had 3,000 seat auditorium.
Yeah, the Waco Auditorium.
1899 to 1928, something like that.
Yep.
Was one of the...
Built it too big, actually.
Yeah, built it too big. And one of the things I brought up was, you put 3,000 people in a room, it's going to get hot pretty quick, right? And then as things transitioned into moving pictures, where not only do you want to get people in a room, you want it really dark and quiet. So now the room's even more closed, and ventilation is minimal. And it really starts limiting your ability, when you can do shows, right? You can't always do it when it's cool outside or when it's dark outside. So you think about the economics of that, and you're like, man, air conditioning would pay for itself, right? Well, early air conditioning, it was blocks of ice.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
They would hoist a big block of ice up and blow a fan over it, and that's what would cool the auditorium. And so if you had a blockbuster Stephen,
Yeah, it would go through.
you would go through a lot of ice because
Yeah.
it was that good.
If
of a
there's
show.
anything that doesn't connect back to air conditioning.
I'm telling you, you got to look out. And totally unrelated to entertainment, Wilkerson Hatch Bailey,
Well,
or Wilkerson Hatch,
yeah.
the funeral company.
Yeah.
They were the third air-conditioned facility in Waco.
Oh, we didn't have that on the episode.
No, we
Yeah,
didn't.
that's interesting.
Yeah, but it makes sense. It's the same
Yeah.
economics I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go sweat through a funeral.
And I think Neil Morris Hall on Baylor's campus was the first one to have air conditioning put in on Baylor's campus. But anyway, I'm not sure that building's no longer there. But
Yeah, don't know about that.
But we're not revisiting the AC episode. So yeah, Fiona we did a whirlwind tour through a lot of Waco spaces for entertainment, and then Jim Holmes primarily helped us talk about musical artists.
Yes,
connected to Waco, which is a long list.
it is,
Mhm.
and that really opened my eyes. In fact, I would love to see that that history captured somewhere in Waco. You know,
Mhm.
whether it's a traveling exhibit or something. There was some really
Yeah.
solid stuff there.
Yeah.
That as we're, I thought about when we mentioned a minute ago, Waco was the 7th largest city. We're the 24th largest city in Texas now, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot that have grown past us, especially the near metro cities,
Mm-hmm.
and but and not I don't want to denigrate any one town, but think of some of those suburb cities that are now bigger than us
Mm-hmm.
that really don't have the history
Yeah.
we do,
Yeah.
and
Cultureless.
they don't.
Hobbles.
Yeah, and we talk about one of the old names of Waco was City with a Soul, and it would be great to really do more to bring out that soul,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what makes us different. Are we going to climb up the scale and be the 7th largest city again? Probably not, but I would love to be one of the best cities with what we have, and a lot of that's taking your culture and
exactly
living up to it.
And Chris Hansen and Carl Hoover helped kind of fill in some blanks for us with some additional artists that we didn't talk about in Jim Holmes's episode. And we also got into movies and TV, kind of connected to Waco.
Yeah, a lot. Again, surprising how many connections there were. Kind of back to the music.
Yeah.
The theme song.
For
the Waco History Podcast.
Everyone
give some
listening,
background.
everyone listening has heard this song. So, across the Brazos in Waco, Billy Walker song, which when Randy and I started the podcast in 2018, we contacted Billy Walker's family and asked for permission to use that song, and they granted us rights to use it. But I think it's an iconic local song. I'm going to do an episode sometime on a songs about Waco, which is I've got my own Waco history playlist on Spotify that kind of does songs about Waco, which is kind of interesting, different artists and the ways they've sung about Waco. But Billy Walker would be at the top of the list.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I didn't uncover until after that episode was he had a direct connection to Waco.
And I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So he was born in Rawls, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
His mother died when she was 6. His dad could not take care of him and his brothers. So his dad sent him to the Methodist home in Waco.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Really
he was here. I'm not sure exactly how many years. He did finish high school in Whiteface, Texas. So he didn't stay here all the way through his education, but spent some time here in Waco. You're gonna wonder how that's connected. He probably as a child probably spent some time down there at the Brazos.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we went through a long list of individuals there and movies and TV related to Waco, which is really diverse, and a lot of characters there and productions connected to Waco. Really interesting. Waco is a landscape to kind of shoot films. and also folks that have been in films from Waco.
And it's definitely on the rise.
Mhm.
That's an upward trend.
I think that's
it's
what-
going to be fun to see what happens. in
That's
that
really
world.
what we heard from Chris and Carl is the momentum that's going. That I think there'll be more and more of that.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just say personally, I've been amazed at your knowledge of film music and movies. I mean, you in TV, you've got an amazing.
I mean, I've been
memory.
parented fully, but we did have cable.
Man, we had a couple of stirring episodes with Sheriff McNamara.
Yeah, I appreciate Rick. One of Rick's key roles here is coordinating our great guests. Most of the great guests we've had on the Crossroads, and so it was Sheriff McNamara was Rick's get to have on the podcast, and yeah, it was wonderful having him on. I mean, we talked about a lot of horrific things, but it's interesting when you take a kind of a full scope view of something and kind of talk about it over time. And of course, most of it overlaps his career.
Yeah,
Or a lot of it does.
Yeah, and
his
and
family.
his
His family. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing we didn't talk about
Mm-hmm.
in that episode, because it didn't necessarily touch the sheriff, but there was a great incident in early TV history that
Mhm.
happened here in Waco with the trial of Harry L. Washburn.
Yeah, so Harry L. Washburn's mother-in-law goes out to an automobile in the 50s in San Angelo and tries to cranks the car and sets off a bomb that had been placed in the car, allegedly by Harry Washburn. Turns out he's guilty.
You gave it away now.
Yeah,
So-
sorry. And it was such a, and of course kills his mother-in-law. It was such a suspicion fell immediately on Harry Washburn, and it was a big case in San Angelo. So they filed for a change of venue and brought it to Waco, and that's where it kind of enters in the history books.
Yeah. So, so what year would that have been? 1955. So
Mhm.
January 55. So early TV. So in fact, media pioneer in Waco, Buddy Bostic decides to run the trial unedited and commercial free on his TV station.
Mm-hmm.
Trial takes 4 days, and it was, I don't know if it's the absolute first TV to be trial to be televised, but it was certainly one of the first of a handful.
Well, it was one of the first, and the fact that it was commercial free and unedited was quite unusual too. I mean, this is a commercial enterprise that's relying upon advertising dollars.
Yeah.
And so it was quite a risk in doing that. And for there are images on the app of that trial if you want to see some images of. I was telling Rick before we recorded. It also gives you some images of what that courtroom looked like when the courthouse was constructed. It's since been renovated, but yeah.
Yeah, used to be kind of a 2-story room with a
Mhm.
gallery.
It had a
around it.
gallery up above it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was apparently a pretty juicy trial. So he was a former son-in-law, was not happy that he was getting left out of the family fortune. Apparently, a lot of the witnesses that were interviewed were barmaids.
Yeah, there was a parade of character witnesses, I think, that came through that were, it was good television. Let's just put it that way.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, and it's still a staple of TV
Mhm.
today. I mean, we got whole cable networks dedicated to watching the paint dry in Congress, and that's not near as exciting as a real trial like this.
Yeah. So one question I want to ask you, Rick. So I mean, that was the last series our listeners listened to if they've been tracking the series. What did we not do? What did we miss that we should have?
Well,
Yeah.
some that came to mind that considered going down the trail of religion. Religion
Mhm.
is a huge thread through Waco, and there's some great stuff there. But kind of similar to the entertainment one, it's like I don't know. I know where you start
Yeah.
in 1850, but I don't know there's so many tangents you can go down on that.
Yeah, there are a lot of different angles something like that could go, but it's not just a state story. It's not just a national story. It's an international story. Ways in which Waco's connected.
Oh, yeah.
To places all around the world. So that could have been a great one. Any other ones you think?
I was telling a friend today. There's some great and interesting history in banking in Waco. But I kind of thought nobody wants to hear about bankers cry about their problems.
It's as exciting as air conditioning.
Hey, wait.
Sorry.
So banking is one that didn't quite make it. Did you have any other thoughts on?
Well, I mean, we could do a literary Crossroads. We could do, we didn't really get into academics as far as like publishing Crossroads and
there's some visual art stuff we didn't get into. Kermit Oliver, some of the great works that he's done. He and other people have done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's definitely ways in which we could have approached it. I'm not arguing for us to keep going. We're wrapping it up.
Hey, every good thing must end, all right?
But let's just say this is suggestive of, I look, even as we look at the Alico building, you think about Waco as an energy crossroads, as I see the power plant
and
out on the horizon there. So I think there's a lot of ways you could approach Waco as crossroads that we didn't get to. We'll say this is suggestive for you to do your own study on Waco Crossroads.
or we might have some special edition episodes.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going anywhere. Rick, one thing that we did in the first episode that I think would be good to do in the last one is kind of pull back a little bit. And draw some conclusions. What are some things that kind of some overview thoughts you have on this?
Yeah. Life is not linear.
That's very existential.
Yes.
I wouldn't expect
time is linear.
Yeah.
But the way things grow and develop and some things as complex as culture and community.
Yeah.
It's not just a story that's up and to the right all the time.
That's right. Yeah, and it also built upon that theme we've been following since Randy and I started. Waco is a southern town, Waco is a western town, and the tensions of being both, and what that means culturally and economically, and all those sorts of things.
We were the western edge of the cotton slave culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that has reverberated through the history of Waco in good and bad ways. Racial relations, some of those very negative ways to positive ways, like when we talked about the Brazos Blues and some of the culture that came out of that cotton culture. And Waco pretty much had to remake itself after cotton lost its ability to fuel the economy.
Yeah.
And there were some great leaders who recognized that and started building different industries and different opportunities to, like I said earlier, to the point where we're one of the most diverse economies in Texas. But that didn't happen without a lot of forethought. Talking about Mr. Colgan and bringing the interstate through town. Some of him and some of his contemporaries were also the ones who got the Corps of Engineers to build Lake Waco. And that water supply is one of Waco's greatest assets. We're one of the few towns in Texas that owns their own lake and water supply.
Yeah.
You can only imagine how that's going to play out as we just crossed the 30 million population mark in Texas. And probably in the next 20, 25 years, we'll cross 40 million. So water is going to become extremely important.
Is the Middle Bosque running today? Did you check? Is it running today?
It was just barely trickling yesterday. And I bet with the rain today, we didn't probably get enough to actually get it flowing. But
so we can talk about again, those waves of prosperity, waves of decline, the way in which that drops down in the mid 20th century, picks back up in the 21st century, to be sure. The ways in which that kind of goes up and down, we really got a sense of that in different ways.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily connected to artistic output and, other elements of,
Right.
Yeah, what's going on.
The and the wild cards that happen, right? There's the things you control, but then there's the things that you don't, like a tornado leveling your downtown.
Yeah.
At probably the worst time, right?
Yeah.
Right when you were kind of in already hitting a malaise, and then you get just a knockout punch.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily control things like a cute couple getting a reality TV show, and it ends up being a international sensation that tells a different story of Waco and changes perceptions all over the world, after not being able to control what happened in 1993 with the Branch Davidian debacle. So, the community has the things it controls and the things it doesn't, and how you, how as a community and the leadership in the community deals with those things positively or negatively can have a huge impact on the trajectory.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's, traveling this road with you has been a joy. It's been a lot of fun to cover this ground, and all the folks. We've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I think as we've gone.
I feel sorry for all my friends that, start talking to me, and I automatically go into my Crossroads, monologue. They start asking me stuff. I'm like, well, did you know? So yeah, I'm sure my wife's ready for me to move on to something else.
We began in a warehouse on Webster. Now we're in the 21st floor of the Alico building, which I think is the setting we deserve.
Moving on up, as you'd say.
Exactly, to the east side. Yeah, and so it's really been a lot of fun, Rick. I can't thank you enough for the work you put into this and coordination you put into it. And listeners, we hoped you enjoyed it as well. Any parting words you want to offer?
Thank you. Well, I want to say thanks to you for letting me horn in on your podcast and be a part of it for these episodes. Well, it's been fun. I've learned a ton. I've enjoyed, I knew a lot of the people we interviewed. I didn't know everyone. And so it's been fun getting to know others as well. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. And then we also, together, we want to thank you, the listener, for continuing to listen to the Waco History Podcast. And we would encourage you to go back and catch those Crossroads episodes that you missed and share with family and friends.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com, and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.